My name is Derek, and what I'm about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago in the mountains of Montana. My girlfriend Lisa and I rented what we thought was a dream cabin for our anniversary weekend. We almost didn't make it out alive. And the worst part? The owner knew exactly what he was doing to us. It was 2:43 a.m. when I found the first body, hidden behind a false wall in the basement, perfectly preserved by the Montana cold. A woman, maybe 25, still wearing the same hiking boots I'd seen in the rental photos. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, and her skin had that waxy, unnatural look that only comes from being frozen for months. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing we weren't the first guests to find it. You know that moment when you're in complete darkness and you hear something that makes your blood turn to ice? That's what happened when I heard Lisa screaming from upstairs. Not a normal scream. The kind of scream that comes from seeing something so horrific your mind can't process it. The kind of scream that tells you your life just changed forever. I thought we were just unlucky renters. God, I wish we had been just unlucky. We'd driven 4 hours from Seattle to this cabin in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no neighbors for 15 miles, just us and what we thought was going to be the perfect romantic getaway. The photos online were gorgeous. Stone fireplace, hot tub on the deck, panoramic mountain views, and the price? Too good to be true. $150 a night for what looked like $1 million property. Frank, the owner, had been so helpful in his messages. "You're going to love it up there," he'd written. "It's the kind of place where you can really disappear from the world." Disappear. If only I'd paid attention to that word choice. 4 couples before us. 4 couples who never made it home from their Montana getaway. I have the rental agreement with Frank's real name on it. I have the hidden camera footage he didn't know I'd found. I have the police reports they tried to bury, the missing person cases that were never solved, the families who are still looking for answers. Everything they tried to cover up, everything they paid people to forget. When we first arrived at the cabin, Frank insisted on giving us a personal tour. "Just want to make sure you know where everything is," he said with that friendly smile that now makes my skin crawl. He showed us every room, every closet, every corner of the property, except the basement. "That's off limits," he said, his voice changing just slightly. "Foundation issues. Dangerous." Foundation issues. That's what he called the room where he kept his victims. Lisa found the first clue that night. She was unpacking in the bedroom when she discovered women's clothes in the back of the closet. Not just any clothes, hiking gear, the expensive kind. "Derek," she called out, holding up a North Face jacket. "Why would the owner leave someone else's stuff here?" I should have listened to her. Should have packed up right then and driven back to Seattle. But I was a man, right? Had to be logical. Had to have explanations for everything. "Probably just forgot to clean it out," I said. "People leave stuff behind all the time." But it wasn't just one jacket. It was a whole wardrobe. 3 different sizes. 3 different women. And when Lisa checked the pockets, she found something that made my blood freeze. A driver's license. Sarah Martinez, 26, from Denver. Expired 2 years ago. Have you ever wondered why some vacation rentals are so cheap? Why some places seem too good to be true? Why some hosts are so eager to have you stay in their remote properties? Because I found out. And I wish I hadn't. The second night I couldn't sleep. Something about the cabin felt wrong. The way the floorboards creaked in patterns, like someone was walking around upstairs when we were downstairs. The way the temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms. The way I kept feeling like we were being watched. That's when I decided to explore the basement. Frank had said it was dangerous, but the door wasn't locked. Just a simple wooden door that opened onto a staircase leading down into darkness. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and started down, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was bigger than it should have been, much bigger. It extended far beyond the footprint of the cabin above, like it had been excavated by hand over years. And the smell. God, the smell. Sweet and rotten and cold all at the same time. That's where I found the freezer, industrial-sized, humming quietly in the corner. And next to it, power tools. Saws, drills, things that had no business being in a vacation rental basement. But it was the wall that really got my attention. A section that looked newer than the rest, painted a slightly different color. When I pushed on it, it moved, a false wall hiding a space behind it, and that's where I found her. The first body, Sarah Martinez, the woman from the driver's license, sitting in a chair like she was waiting for someone, perfectly preserved by the Montana cold. If you've made it this far, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story, it's a warning. Because Frank is still out there. His cabin is still listed on rental sites, and he's still selecting couples for his special kind of hospitality. We thought we were booking a romantic getaway. We had no idea we were booking our own execution. And if you've ever stayed in a remote rental that felt wrong, if you've ever felt like you were being watched in a place that was supposed to be safe, if you've ever found belongings that didn't belong to you, you might have met Frank too. You just didn't know it yet. The question isn't whether you'd be brave enough to investigate a suspicious basement. The question is, would you be smart enough to run before it was too late? Because Lisa and I barely were, and we're the lucky ones. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to when Lisa and I thought we were just two people from Seattle, looking for a romantic escape from our stressful city lives. Back to when we believed that the worst thing that could happen on a vacation was bad weather or overpriced food. We'd been together for 3 years. 3 years of the same routine: work, Netflix, sleep, repeat. Lisa worked at a marketing firm downtown, pulling 60-hour weeks and coming home exhausted. I was doing software development for a startup that demanded everything and gave nothing back. We were burning out, and we both knew it. "Derek, when's the last time we did something just for us?" Lisa asked one evening, looking up from her laptop where she'd been working until 11 p.m. again. Something that didn't involve work emails or deadlines or any of this city noise. She was right. We'd been so caught up in building our careers that we'd forgotten to build our relationship. Our 3-year anniversary was coming up, and I hadn't even thought about planning anything special. What kind of boyfriend does that make me? That's when Lisa found the cabin listing. She was scrolling through Airbnb during her lunch break when she saw it. This incredible log cabin nestled in the Montana Rockies, surrounded by pristine wilderness and absolute silence. The photos were breathtaking. A stone fireplace that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A hot tub on the deck with panoramic mountain views. A kitchen that was better equipped than most restaurants. "Look at this place," she said, showing me her phone. "And check out the price, $150 a night for the whole cabin in Montana during peak season. That's practically free." I looked at the listing and she was right. Properties like this usually went for $400, $500 a night minimum. The photos showed a luxury cabin that could easily house 6 people, but it was priced like a budget motel room. Either it was too good to be true, or we'd stumbled onto the deal of a lifetime. The reviews were glowing, 5 stars across the board. "Perfect getaway," one guest wrote. "Host was incredibly accommodating." Another said, "Felt like we had the whole mountain to ourselves. Truly unforgettable experience." Unforgettable. If only we'd known what that really meant. Frank responded to our booking request within minutes. "Derek and Lisa, so excited to have you stay at my little slice of paradise. I guarantee you'll have an experience you'll never forget. The mountains have a way of changing people. Can't wait to meet you both in person." Changing people. Another phrase I should have paid attention to. The drive from Seattle took us through some of the most beautiful country I'd ever seen. Rolling hills gave way to towering peaks, and the air got cleaner with every mile. Lisa was more relaxed than I'd seen her in months, singing along to the radio and taking pictures of everything. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, squeezing my hand. "Just us, nature, and no distractions. No distractions, no cell service, no way to call for help." Frank's cabin was exactly where the GPS said it would be, at the end of a winding dirt road that seemed to go on forever. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. The nearest town was over an hour's drive. We were completely isolated, which at the time felt romantic and adventurous. The cabin itself was even more impressive in person. Solid log construction, probably built in the late 70s, with that rustic charm that city people like us found irresistible. It sat on about 5 acres of cleared land, surrounded by dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The kind of place where you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one would hear you. Frank was waiting for us on the porch when we arrived. Mid-50s, average height, with the kind of friendly smile that immediately put you at ease. He looked like someone's uncle, the kind of guy who'd tell stories around a campfire and make sure everyone felt welcome. "Derek, Lisa," he called out, walking toward our car with arms outstretched like we were old friends. "Welcome to my little piece of heaven. How was the drive? Not too rough on those city tires, I hope?" He insisted on giving us a complete tour of the property. "I want to make sure you know where everything is," he said, leading us from room to room. "The kitchen's fully stocked. Help yourselves to anything, the hot tub's ready to go, perfect for watching the sunset. And the fireplace has plenty of seasoned wood stacked right outside." Every room was perfect, too perfect, like a movie set designed to look like the ideal mountain retreat. The furniture was expensive, but arranged to look casual. The decorations were tasteful but felt staged. Even the books on the shelves looked like they'd been selected by an interior designer rather than actually read. "Now there's just one area that's off limits," Frank said as we finished the tour. We were standing in the kitchen, and he gestured toward a door I hadn't noticed before. "The basement. I'm doing some foundation work down there, and it's not safe for guests. Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt on my watch." Foundation work, in a cabin that was clearly decades old and perfectly maintained, but Frank said it with such casual authority that questioning it felt rude. "No problem," I said. "We're here for the mountains anyway, not the basement." Frank's smile got wider. "Exactly. You're here to disconnect from the world. Speaking of which, you probably noticed there's no cell service up here, but there's Wi-Fi if you absolutely need to check in with civilization. Password is Paradise 1978, the year I bought this place." No cell service. We were completely cut off from the outside world, dependent on Frank's Wi-Fi for any communication. At the time, it felt liberating. Now I realize it was part of the trap. After Frank left, Lisa and I settled in for what we thought would be a perfect romantic evening. We opened a bottle of wine, started a fire, and talked about everything except work. For the first time in months, we felt like ourselves again. "This is perfect," Lisa said, curled up next to me on the couch. "I could stay here forever." Forever. Another word that would take on a sinister meaning. It was when Lisa went to unpack that she found the first strange thing. She was hanging up her clothes in the bedroom closet when she pushed aside some hangers and found women's clothing already there. Not just one or two forgotten items. An entire wardrobe. Hiking boots, fleece jackets, jeans, even underwear. "Derek, come look at this," she called out, her voice uncertain. Why would Frank leave someone else's clothes here? I joined her in the bedroom and saw what she was talking about. The clothes were nice. Expensive outdoor gear from brands like Patagonia and North Face. But they were different sizes, different styles, like they belonged to different women. "Maybe previous guests left them behind," I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. What kind of host leaves other people's belongings in the closet for new guests to find? Lisa was examining a fleece jacket when she found something that made both of us freeze. In the inside pocket was a driver's license. Sarah Martinez, 26, from Denver. The photo showed a pretty brunette with a bright smile. The license had expired 2 years ago. "Derek," Lisa said, her voice barely a whisper, "why would someone leave their driver's license behind?" I didn't have an answer. People don't just forget their driver's licenses. They don't abandon entire wardrobes, and they certainly don't leave behind the kind of expensive gear we were finding in that closet. That's when I started paying attention to other details I'd missed during Frank's tour. The windows had locks, but they were on the outside. The kind of locks that would keep people in, not out. The Wi-Fi router was in a locked cabinet, controlled by Frank, and the basement door, the one Frank said was off limits, had a heavy-duty deadbolt that looked newly installed. "Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I think we should look into this place a little more. Something doesn't feel right." She nodded, clutching Sarah Martinez's driver's license. I tried to Google this woman's name, but the Wi-Fi is so slow it won't load. It's like Frank is controlling what we can and can't access. That night, We barely slept. Every sound the old cabin made seemed amplified. The wind in the trees sounded like whispers. The settling of the wooden beams sounded like footsteps. And somewhere, faintly, we could swear we heard voices coming from below us. From the basement that Frank said was off limits. The next morning, Frank showed up bright and early with fresh coffee and homemade muffins. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, but his eyes were studying our faces carefully, like he was looking for something specific. "Great," I lied. "Really peaceful up here." "Oh, it is," Frank agreed. "So peaceful that some guests never want to leave. In fact, I've had several couples who loved it so much they decided to extend their stay indefinitely. Extend their stay indefinitely. The way he said it made my blood run cold. That's when I knew we weren't just unlucky renters who'd stumbled onto a weird situation. We were the latest in a series of carefully selected victims. And Frank had been planning our visit for much longer than we realized. The question wasn't whether we'd have a good time at the cabin. The question was whether we'd live long enough to leave it. The second night at Frank's cabin, neither Lisa nor I could sleep. Every creak of the old wooden beams sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like whispers. And somewhere, faintly but persistently, we could hear what sounded like voices coming from below us. From the basement, Frank had told us was off limits. "Derek, are you hearing this?" Lisa whispered, gripping my arm. We were lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, both of us wide awake despite being exhausted from our day of hiking. I was hearing it. A low murmur, like people having a conversation in another room. But we were supposed to be alone. Frank had left hours ago, and we were 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. There shouldn't have been anyone else on the property. "It's probably just the wind," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Old cabins make weird noises." Lisa sat up, her silhouette visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "That's not wind, Derek. That's voices. Multiple voices." She was right. As we listened more carefully, we could make out what sounded like a conversation. Too muffled to understand the words, but definitely human voices. And they were coming from directly below us. That's when I decided to investigate the basement myself. I waited until Lisa fell into a restless sleep, then grabbed my phone's flashlight and crept downstairs. The basement door was exactly where Frank had shown us, off the kitchen, marked with that heavy-duty deadbolt that looked newly installed. But when I tried the handle, it wasn't locked. The door opened onto a wooden staircase that descended into complete darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and carried that same sweet, rotten smell I'd noticed when we first arrived. But there was something else now, the smell of cleaning chemicals, like someone had been trying to mask something worse. I started down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was much larger than it should have been, extending far beyond the footprint of the cabin above. It looked like it had been excavated by hand over years, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor that had been packed down hard. That's where I found the freezer, industrial-sized, humming quietly in the corner, and next to it, a workbench with tools that had no business being in a vacation rental, saws, drills, plastic sheeting, and containers of what looked like lime. But it was the wall that really caught my attention. A section that looked newer than the rest, painted a slightly different color. When I pushed on it, it moved. A false wall, hiding a space behind it. And that's where I found her. Sarah Martinez, the woman from the driver's license Lisa had found. Sitting in a chair like she was waiting for someone, perfectly preserved by the Montana cold. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, and her skin had that waxy, unnatural look that only comes from being frozen for months. I stumbled backward, my phone clattering to the floor. The light spun wildly, illuminating other shapes in the darkness. More chairs, more bodies, all of them young, all of them perfectly preserved, all of them arranged like they were attending some kind of macabre dinner party. That's when I heard the voices again, clearer now, coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. I followed the sound, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. The voices led me to another room, this one behind a heavy wooden door. When I opened it, I found something that made my blood freeze. A living area. Comfortable chairs, a space heater, shelves lined with books and personal belongings. And sitting in one of the chairs very much alive, was Frank. He wasn't alone. There were two other men with him, both around his age, both wearing the same kind of friendly smile that had put us at ease when we first arrived. They were looking at photographs spread out on a table between them, photographs of couples, young couples, including one of Lisa and me. "Derek," Frank said, looking up with that same warm smile, "I was wondering when you'd join us. We were just discussing your stay. How are you and Lisa enjoying the cabin?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The three men were looking at me like I was expected, like this was all perfectly normal, like finding a room full of frozen corpses was just part of the vacation experience. "Cat got your tongue?" one of the other men said, chuckling. "Don't worry, son. First time's always a shock, but you'll get used to it." Get used to it. Like murder was something you could develop a tolerance for. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. "We're Frank's associates," the second man said. "We help him with the logistics of running a vacation rental in such a remote location. It's more complicated than most people realize." Logistics. They were talking about murder like it was a business operation. Frank stood up, still smiling. "Derek, I know this is a lot to process, but you and Lisa are special. You're not like the others. You're observant, curious, the kind of people who might understand what we're really doing here." "What are you really doing here?" "We're curators," Frank said, gesturing toward the photographs. "We collect experiences, memories, moments of pure terror and realization, and we preserve them forever." He picked up one of the photographs, a young couple I didn't recognize. "This is Brad and Jennifer. They stayed here 2 years ago, lovely couple, very much in love. They discovered our little operation on their 3rd night, just like you did. The look in their eyes when they realized what was happening, it was beautiful, beautiful." He was talking about the moment people realized they were going to die like it was art. "You're insane," I said, backing toward the door. "Am I?" Frank asked, tilting his head. "Or am I just honest about what vacation rentals really are? Think about it, Derek. People come to remote locations to escape their normal lives, to experience something different, something memorable. We just make sure their experience is truly unforgettable. Unforgettable, because dead people don't forget." "Lisa doesn't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Not yet," Frank agreed. "But she will. They always do. It's part of the process. The discovery, the realization, the terror, and finally, the acceptance. Acceptance, like people eventually agreed to be murdered. We've been doing this for 6 years, one of the other men said. 12 couples so far, all of them carefully selected, all of them preserved exactly as they were in their final moments. 12 couples, 24 people, all of them dead because they'd wanted a romantic getaway in the mountains. The authorities don't investigate," Frank continued. "Remote locations, no witnesses, no evidence. People disappear in the wilderness all the time. Hiking accidents, animal attacks, exposure. The mountains are dangerous places." He was right. We were so isolated that no one would think to look for us here. Our families would assume we'd had an accident, gotten lost, fallen off a cliff. They'd never suspect that we'd been murdered by our vacation rental host. "What happens now?" I asked. Frank's smile grew wider. "Now you go back upstairs. You pretend this conversation never happened. You spend one more day with Lisa, enjoying the cabin, making memories. And tomorrow night, you'll both join our collection. And if I refuse, then you'll join our collection tonight," the second man said, standing up. He was holding something in his hand, a syringe filled with clear liquid. "But we prefer to wait. The anticipation makes the final moment so much more intense." I ran, turned and ran up those basement stairs faster than I'd ever run in my life. Behind me, I could hear Frank laughing, not chasing me, just laughing, like he knew I had nowhere to go. When I got back to the bedroom, Lisa was awake. "Derek, where were you? I heard voices and then I heard you running." "We have to leave," I said, grabbing our suitcases. "Right now, we have to get out of here." "What? Why? What happened?" I told her everything, the basement, the bodies, Frank and his associates. She listened with growing horror, her face going pale in the moonlight. "We have to call the police," she said, reaching for her phone. "No signal, remember? And the Wi-Fi is controlled by Frank. He'll know if we try to contact anyone. We tried the car. The engine turned over, but nothing happened. When I popped the hood, I could see that the battery cables had been disconnected. Frank had disabled our car while we were sleeping. We were trapped. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, no way to call for help, no way to leave. And Frank knew we knew. He was probably down in that basement right now, preparing for tomorrow night's collection. What do we do? Lisa asked, her voice shaking. I looked out the window at the dark forest surrounding us. Somewhere out there, Frank and his associates were planning our deaths, but we still had tonight. We still had a chance. We survive, I said. Whatever it takes, we survive. But as I said it, I could see lights moving through the trees, flashlights, multiple flashlights coming toward the cabin. Frank and his associates weren't waiting until tomorrow night after all. They were coming for us now. The moment I saw those flashlights moving through the trees toward our cabin, I knew Frank and his associates had changed their timeline. They weren't waiting until tomorrow night. They were coming for us now, and we had maybe minutes before they reached the cabin. Lisa, we need to hide, I whispered, grabbing her hand and pulling her away from the window. They're coming. But where could we hide in a cabin that Frank knew better than we did? He'd given us the tour, shown us every room, every closet. There was nowhere he wouldn't think to look, except the basement, I said. It's the last place they'd expect us to go. Lisa stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Derek, that's where the bodies are. That's where they do their work. Exactly. They won't expect us to go back there voluntarily. We crept downstairs as quietly as possible, but every floorboard seemed to creak louder than before. The basement door was still unlocked, still leading down into that cold, chemical-scented darkness. But now I knew what was waiting for us down there. The industrial freezer was still humming in the corner. The workbench with its collection of saws and drills was still there. And behind the false wall, Sarah Martinez and the others were still sitting in their chairs, waiting for visitors who would never come. But there was something else I hadn't noticed before. Another door partially hidden behind a stack of lumber. When I pushed it open, I found what looked like Frank's office. A desk, filing cabinets, and walls covered with photographs, maps, and documents. Jesus Christ, Lisa whispered, looking at the walls. Derek, look at this. The photographs weren't just of the couples who died at the cabin. There were dozens of them from different locations, different cabins, different vacation rentals, different victims. All young couples, all smiling and happy in their final vacation photos. He's not just doing this here, I said, studying the images. This is a network. The maps on the wall showed locations across 5 states: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Washington. Each location was marked with a red pin, and next to each pin was a number. The Montana location, Frank's cabin, was marked with 12. 12 couples, 24 people. All of them dead because they'd wanted a romantic getaway. But the filing cabinets were what really made my blood run cold. They were filled with rental agreements, background checks, social media profiles, and detailed surveillance reports. Frank hadn't just been randomly selecting victims, he'd been studying them for months before they ever booked their stays. Lisa, look at this, I said, pulling out a thick folder with our names on it. Inside were printouts of our Facebook profiles, our Instagram posts, our work information, even our credit reports. There were photos of us taken from a distance, at restaurants, walking to our cars, leaving our apartment building. He's been watching us, Lisa said, her voice barely audible. For how long? I flipped through the documents looking for dates. The earliest surveillance photo was from 6 months ago. 6 months. Frank had been planning our deaths for half a year. There's more, I said, opening another folder. This one contained correspondence with other people, email addresses, phone numbers, and what looked like financial transactions. Frank wasn't working alone. He was part of something much bigger. The emails were coded, but the meaning was clear enough. Package delivered successfully. Client satisfied with product quality. Next shipment scheduled for delivery. They were talking about murder like it was a business transaction. And then I found the client list. Names, addresses, and payment amounts. People who were paying Frank and his associates to kill specific types of victims. Some wanted young couples, Others wanted solo travelers. A few had very specific requirements: hair color, age range, profession. They're not just serial killers, I said, showing Lisa the documents. They're contract killers. People pay them to murder specific types of victims. Lisa was reading over my shoulder, her hands shaking. Derek, look at this entry. Derek Thompson and Lisa Chen, requested by client Tharka 47. Payment, $50,000. Special instructions: preserve in seated position, maintain facial expressions. Someone had paid Frank $50,000 to kill us. Someone who knew our names, knew what we looked like, knew enough about us to make specific requests about how our bodies should be preserved. Who's client number 47? Lisa asked. I flipped through the client list, looking for the corresponding number. When I found it, my blood turned to ice. It's your boss, I said. Richard Kellerman, your boss at the marketing firm. Lisa stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. That's impossible. Richard's been nothing but supportive. He gave me the time off for this trip. He even recommended Montana as a destination. Recommended Montana. Of course he had. He'd been setting us up from the beginning. Why would he want us dead? Lisa asked. I kept reading through the files, looking for more information about client number 47. What I found was a detailed dossier on Lisa's work at the marketing firm. She'd been investigating some irregularities in the company's accounts. Nothing major, just some discrepancies that didn't add up. But apparently those discrepancies were connected to something much bigger. You were getting too close, I said, showing her the documents. Your investigation into the company's finances. You were about to discover that Richard's been embezzling money for years. Lisa read through the papers, her face growing pale. These are the accounts I've been auditing, the ones that didn't make sense. Richard said they were just clerical errors, but they weren't errors. They were theft. And when you started asking questions, Richard decided it would be easier to have you killed than to answer them. The sound of footsteps above us made us both freeze. Frank and his associates had reached the cabin. We could hear them moving around upstairs, searching for us. Derek, Lisa, Frank's voice called out, friendly and cheerful as always. Where are you hiding? We just want to talk. Talk, right. The same way he'd talked to the 12 couples before us. We need to get out of here, I whispered, but Lisa was still staring at the documents. I can't believe Richard would do this, she said. I've worked for him for 3 years. I trusted him. Lisa, we can process this later. Right now we need to focus on staying alive. But as I said it, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The basement only had one exit, the stairs we'd come down. If Frank and his associates came down here, we'd be trapped with nowhere to run. The footsteps above us were getting more systematic. They were searching every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. It was only a matter of time before they thought to check the basement. There, Lisa said, pointing to something I'd missed. In the corner of Frank's office was a small window, barely big enough for a person to crawl through. It was our only chance. I tried to open it, but it was painted shut. Years of Montana winters had sealed it tight. I grabbed a screwdriver from Frank's desk and started chipping away at the paint, but it was slow work. Derek! Lisa! Frank's voice was closer now. I know you're down here. I can smell your fear. The basement door opened. Footsteps on the wooden stairs. Frank and at least 2 other people were coming down, and we were still trapped in his office. The window, I said, working frantically with the screwdriver. Almost got it. The window finally gave way, opening onto a view of the forest behind the cabin. It was a tight squeeze, but we might be able to make it. You first, I said, helping Lisa climb through the window. She was smaller than me, and she managed to squeeze through with only minor scrapes. I was halfway through the window when I heard Frank's voice right behind me. Going somewhere, Derek? I turned to see him standing in the doorway of his office, that same friendly smile on his face, but his eyes were cold, calculating. The eyes of a predator who'd cornered his prey. You know, I'm actually impressed, Frank said, stepping into the room. Most couples never make it this far. Most of them just accept their fate. But you two, you're fighters. What do you want? I asked, still half hanging out the window. I want you to understand something, Frank said, moving closer. This isn't personal. It's just business. Your boss paid us good money to make sure you and Lisa disappeared, and we always deliver on our contracts. You're insane. Am I? Or am I just a businessman who's found a profitable niche? There are a lot of people out there who need problems solved quietly. Employees who ask too many questions, spouses who won't sign divorce papers, witnesses who might testify in court. We provide a service. A service. He was talking about murder like it was pest control. The authorities will figure it out, I said. They'll connect the disappearances. Frank laughed. The authorities? Derek, we've been doing this for 6 years. 12 couples, 24 people, and not one investigation has come close to us. You know why? Because we're careful. We select our victims carefully, we dispose of them carefully, and we cover our tracks carefully. He was right. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses, no evidence, and no way to call for help. Even if we escaped, who would believe us? A story about vacation rental serial killers would sound like something out of a horror movie. But you're different, Frank continued. You're curious, you investigate, you ask questions. That makes you dangerous. That's why client Sarah 47 was willing to pay extra for you. Extra? We weren't just victims, we were premium victims. Lisa's already outside, I said, hoping to distract him long enough to finish climbing through the window. I know, Frank said. My associates are waiting for her, she won't get far. That's when I heard Lisa scream from outside, a scream of pure terror that cut through the night air like a knife. Frank's smile got wider. Sounds like they found her. I pulled myself the rest of the way through the window and dropped to the ground outside. Lisa was 20 feet away, being held by 2 men I recognized from the basement. The same men who'd been looking at our photographs, planning our deaths. Derek, she called out. Run! Get help! But there was nowhere to run. We were surrounded by dense forest, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, with no way to call for help. And Frank's associates knew these mountains better than we ever could. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, one of the men said. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, you're both coming with us. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't just victims of a random serial killer. We were the targets of a sophisticated murder-for-hire operation that had been planning our deaths for months. And no matter what we did, no matter how far we ran, they would find us. Because they were professionals. And we were just 2 people who'd wanted a romantic weekend in the mountains. The question wasn't whether we'd survive the night. The question was whether anyone would ever know what really happened to us. The moment Frank's associates grabbed Lisa outside the cabin window, I knew our time was up. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was seeing the woman I loved being held by killers, or maybe it was the rage of knowing we'd been hunted for months like animals. Either way, I wasn't going down without a fight. Let her go, I shouted, charging toward the man holding Lisa. He was bigger than me, probably stronger, but he wasn't expecting a desperate man with nothing left to lose. I tackled him around the waist, and we both went down hard. Lisa broke free and ran toward the trees, but the second man was already chasing her. I could hear Frank climbing out of the basement window behind me, probably with more weapons, more backup. Derek, this way! Lisa called from the edge of the forest. She'd found what looked like a hiking trail, barely visible in the moonlight. It was our only chance. We ran into the woods with no idea where we were going. The trail was narrow, overgrown, and treacherous in the dark. Branches whipped at our faces, roots caught our feet, and every shadow looked like it could be hiding one of Frank's associates. Behind us, I could hear them organizing. Frank's voice, calm and methodical. Tom, take the north trail. Mike, circle around to the creek. They can't have gone far. They knew these mountains. They'd probably hunted people through these same woods before. We were city people, stumbling through unfamiliar terrain in the dark, while they were experienced predators on their home turf. Derek, Lisa gasped, grabbing my arm. I can't keep running like this. She was right. We were both exhausted, and the altitude was getting to us. But stopping meant dying. Frank had made that clear. That's when I saw it. A light in the distance flickering through the trees. Not a flashlight, something steadier. A building, maybe. Civilization. There, I said, pointing toward the light. We just need to make it there. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't salvation. It was another cabin. Smaller than Frank's, more rustic, but clearly occupied. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and I could see movement in the windows. "Should we ask for help?" Lisa whispered. Before I could answer, the cabin door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch and my blood turned to ice. It was one of Frank's associates, the one who'd been holding the syringe in the basement. "Well, well," he called out. "Look what wandered into my territory." His territory. Frank's operation was bigger than just one cabin. They had multiple locations, multiple safe houses, multiple killing grounds scattered throughout the mountains. "Run," I whispered to Lisa. "Run now." We turned and sprinted back into the woods, but now we could hear pursuit from multiple directions. Frank's voice from behind us, the associate from the cabin to our right, and at least one more person crashing through the underbrush to our left. They were herding us, driving us towards some predetermined location where they could corner us. The trail led to a clearing, and that's where they were waiting. Frank stood in the center, that same friendly smile on his face, flanked by 4 other men. All of them armed, all of them calm, like this was just another day at the office. "Derek, Lisa," Frank said, spreading his arms wide, "you've led us on quite a chase. I'm impressed. Most couples don't make it this far." "What do you want?" I asked, pulling Lisa behind me. "I want you to understand something," Frank said, stepping closer. "This isn't random. This isn't some psychotic break. This is a business, a very profitable business that serves a very specific clientele." He gestured to one of his associates who handed him a tablet. Frank swiped through what looked like a catalog of victims. "Your boss, Richard Kellerman, isn't our only client," Frank continued. "We have customers all over the country, wealthy people with problems that need to be solved quietly. Inconvenient employees, troublesome spouses, potential witnesses. We provide a service." "You're contract killers," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "We're problem solvers," Frank corrected. "And you two were a very expensive problem. $50,000 to be exact, plus a bonus for making it look like an accident." $50,000. That's what our lives were worth to Richard Kellerman. The cost of covering up his embezzlement. "The authorities will figure it out," I said. "They'll connect the disappearances." Frank laughed. "The authorities? Derek, we've been doing this for 6 years, 24 people, and not one investigation has come close to us. You know why? Because we're careful. We select our victims carefully, we dispose of them carefully, and we cover our tracks carefully." He was right. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses, no evidence, and no way to call for help. Even if someone eventually reported us missing, they'd assume we'd had a hiking accident. "But you're different," Frank continued. "You're curious. You investigate. You ask questions. That makes you valuable. That's why I'm going to make you an offer. An offer. Like we were negotiating a business deal instead of fighting for our lives." "Join us," Frank said simply. "You've seen our operation. You understand how it works. We could use someone with your investigative skills. Help us select better victims, plan better scenarios. In exchange, you live." "And Lisa?" Frank's smile faltered slightly. "Lisa was specifically requested by our client. That contract can't be changed. They wanted me to watch them kill the woman I loved, then become part of their murder operation. The thought made me sick." "Never," I said. "I was hoping you'd say that," Frank replied. "It makes this so much more personal." He nodded to his associates, and they started closing in. 5 armed men against 2 exhausted city dwellers. The math wasn't in our favor. That's when I heard it. The sound of an engine in the distance getting closer. A vehicle driving up the mountain road toward Frank's cabin. Frank heard it too. His smile disappeared, replaced by a look of concern. "That's not one of ours," he said to his associates. "Check it out." 2 of the men melted back into the forest, heading toward the sound. Frank and the remaining 2 kept their weapons trained on us, but I could see uncertainty in their eyes. The engine sound got louder, then stopped. Car doors slammed. Voices, multiple voices coming from the direction of the cabin. "Police!" someone shouted in the distance. "This is the Montana State Police. We have a warrant." Police, Somehow, impossibly, the police had found us. But how? We hadn't been able to call for help. We hadn't left any trail. Frank's face went pale. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "We have people in the department. We have arrangements." "Maybe your arrangements aren't as solid as you thought," I said. That's when I heard gunshots. Multiple gunshots coming from the direction of the cabin. Frank's associates were engaging with the police, which meant this was real. This wasn't some elaborate trap. "Move!" I shouted to Lisa, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the sound of the gunfire. If there were police at the cabin, that's where we needed to be. Frank and his remaining associates tried to stop us, but they were caught between pursuing us and dealing with the police raid. In the confusion, Lisa and I managed to break free and run toward the cabin. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes, rocks cutting our feet. Behind us, I could hear Frank shouting orders, his calm demeanor finally cracking. The cabin came into view, surrounded by police vehicles with flashing lights. Officers in tactical gear were moving through the property, searching every building, every hiding place. "Help!" I shouted, stumbling out of the forest with Lisa. "Help us, we're the victims." The officers immediately surrounded us, weapons drawn but not aimed. "Are you Derek Thompson and Lisa Chen?" one of them asked. "Yes," Lisa gasped. "How did you know?" "Your friend called us," the officer said. "Said you'd sent him some kind of coded message through social media. Took us a while to track down this location." "Friend? What friend? We hadn't been able to contact anyone." "Mike," Lisa said suddenly. "My co-worker, Mike. I posted that Instagram story yesterday, the one with the cabin photo. I used our code phrase from work, living the dream, which means the opposite. He must have realized something was wrong. Living the dream, a phrase Lisa used at work when things were going badly. Mike had recognized it as a distress signal and called the police. "We've been tracking this operation for months," the officer continued. "Your boss, Richard Kellerman, is already in custody. He confessed to hiring these people to kill you." Richard was in custody. The man who'd paid $50,000 to have us murdered was finally facing justice. "What about Frank?" I asked. The officer's expression darkened. "Frank Morrison and his associates are still at large. We found evidence of multiple murders at this location, but the suspects escaped into the mountains. Escaped. Frank was still out there, still free, still running his murder-for-hire operation. You're safe now," the officer said, "but this case is far from over. We're going to need your full cooperation to bring down the rest of this network." Network. Frank had been right about one thing. This was bigger than just one cabin in Montana. It was a nationwide operation with clients and killers in multiple states. As the police led us away from the cabin, I looked back at the forest where Frank and his associates had disappeared. Somewhere in those dark woods they were regrouping, planning their next move, selecting their next victims. We'd survived. Against all odds, we'd escaped Frank's killing ground and lived to tell the story. But I knew this wasn't over. Frank had invested too much time and money in his operation to just walk away. He'd be back, maybe not for us, but for someone else. Some other couple looking for a romantic getaway, some other victims who'd stumbled onto his secret. The question wasn't whether we'd survived the night. The question was whether anyone would be safe as long as Frank Morrison was still out there, still hunting, still turning vacation dreams into nightmares. 6 months after our escape from Frank's killing ground in Montana, Lisa and I thought we were finally safe. The FBI had arrested Richard Kellerman, my former boss who'd paid $50,000 to have us murdered. They'd raided multiple properties across 5 states, uncovering evidence of at least 37 deaths connected to Frank's murder-for-hire network. But Frank Morrison himself was never found. The investigation revealed something that chilled me to the bone. Frank's operation wasn't just some backwoods serial killer setup. It was a sophisticated business with clients in major corporations, law firms, and even government agencies. People who needed problems solved quietly, permanently, and with plausible deniability. We testified before a grand jury, gave statements to federal investigators, and helped identify other potential victims. The FBI assured us that Frank's network had been dismantled, that we were safe, that justice would be served, They were wrong. 3 months after the trials ended, Lisa started receiving packages. No return address, no postmark, just items that showed up at our new apartment in Denver. Items that shouldn't have existed. A coffee mug from the cabin, a piece of our hiking gear we'd left behind, a photograph of us sleeping in Frank's guest bedroom. "He's still watching us," Lisa said, holding the photograph with shaking hands. "Even after everything, he's still out there." I tried to convince her it was just someone playing a sick joke, maybe a copycat who'd read about the case in the news. But deep down, I knew she was right. Frank Morrison had invested too much time and money in his operation to just walk away. The FBI assigned us protective detail for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of federal agents following us to work, checking our mail, monitoring our phones. Then the funding ran out. The agents were reassigned and we were on our own again. "Budget constraints," the lead investigator explained. "Frank Morrison is presumed dead. Probably died in the mountains during the winter. You're safe now." Presumed dead, but they never found a body. Never found evidence that he'd actually died. They just assumed that a man who'd survived in those mountains for 6 years couldn't survive one more winter. I knew better. Frank Morrison was a survivor, a predator who'd adapted to every challenge, overcome every obstacle. A man who'd built a nationwide murder network from a single cabin in Montana wasn't going to die from exposure. The proof came on our first anniversary of the escape. Lisa and I had moved again, this time to Portland, using new identities provided by the Witness Protection Program. We thought we were untraceable, invisible, safe. That's when we found the reservation. I was checking our credit card statements when I saw it. A charge for $150 to Mountain View Rentals in Montana, the same amount we'd paid Frank for our original stay, but neither of us had made that reservation. "Someone's using our identities," Lisa said, looking at the statement. "Someone who knows exactly what happened to us." I called the credit card company, but they said the charge was legitimate, made online using our correct information from an IP address in Portland. Someone had been watching us, learning our habits, accessing our accounts. The reservation was for the following weekend. 2 guests, arriving Friday, departing Sunday, the same schedule we'd followed a year earlier. "We have to warn them," Lisa said. "Whoever's going to that cabin, we have to stop them." But when I tried to call Mountain View Rentals, the number was disconnected. When I searched online, the company didn't exist. The reservation was for a property that officially wasn't available for rent. Frank was still operating, still selecting victims, still using our identities to cover his tracks. That weekend, 2 college students from Seattle disappeared while on a camping trip in Montana. Their car was found abandoned on a mountain road, their belongings scattered, their bodies never recovered. The official explanation was a hiking accident, but I knew better. Frank had claimed 2 more victims, and he'd used our names to do it. The FBI reopened the investigation, but they were always one step behind. Frank had learned from his mistakes, adapted his methods, evolved his operation. He was no longer using vacation rental sites or maintaining permanent locations. He was mobile, nomadic, impossible to track, but he was still killing, still selecting couples who fit his preferred profile, still preserving his victims in that same methodical, ritualistic way. Lisa couldn't handle it. The knowledge that Frank was still out there, still using our identities, still murdering people in our names. She started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't work. The woman who'd survived a serial killer was being destroyed by the knowledge that he was still free. "I can't live like this," she told me one night, tears streaming down her face. "I can't live knowing that people are dying because of us." "It's not because of us," I said. "It's because of Frank. He's the killer, not us. But he's using our names, Derek, our identities. Every time he kills someone, it's like we're killing them too." She was right. Frank had found the perfect revenge. He couldn't kill us directly. We were too well protected, too well known. But he could destroy us psychologically by making us complicit in his crimes. 6 months later, Lisa took her own life. She left a note saying she couldn't live with the guilt, couldn't handle the knowledge that Frank was still out there, still killing. The woman who'd survived a murder-for-hire plot was killed by the psychological torture of knowing her survival had enabled more deaths. I found her in our bathroom, the same way we'd found Sarah Martinez in Frank's basement. The parallel wasn't accidental. Frank had orchestrated Lisa's death as surely as if he'd been in the room with her. The funeral was small, private, attended only by family and a few close friends, but I saw him there, in the back row wearing a dark suit and sunglasses, looking like any other mourner. Frank Morrison paying his respects to his latest victim. He nodded to me across the cemetery, a slight smile on his face, a smile that said, "I told you this wasn't over." After the funeral, I tried to rebuild my life. New city, new job, new identity. But Frank's packages kept coming. Photos of Lisa's grave, copies of her suicide note, reminders that he'd won, that he'd destroyed everything I cared about. The FBI gave up. The case went cold. Frank Morrison became a ghost story, a cautionary tale about vacation rentals and remote locations. But I knew he was still out there, still operating, still killing. Last week, I received a package that made my blood freeze. Inside was a vacation rental brochure for a cabin in Colorado, beautiful photos, reasonable prices, glowing reviews, and on the back, in Frank's handwriting, "Thanks for the referral. Business is booming." He's still out there, still selecting victims, still using vacation rental platforms to lure couples to their deaths. And there's nothing I can do to stop him. If you've made it this far, I need you to understand something. Frank Morrison isn't just a serial killer. He's a businessman who's found a profitable niche in the murder industry, and he's not the only one. Always research your vacation rental hosts. Check their reviews carefully. Look for patterns in the feedback. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. And if you're ever in a remote location and you start finding belongings that don't belong to you, if you discover rooms that are supposed to be off limits, if you feel like you're being watched, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just leave, immediately. Because Frank Morrison is still out there, his network is still operating, and somewhere right now, another couple is checking into a cabin that looks too good to be true. Another couple who has no idea they've just been selected for Frank's special kind of hospitality. Always check the reviews. Comment the word cabin if you would still rent an isolated property after hearing this story, because I can never trust vacation rentals again. And if you've ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong, if you've ever found evidence that previous guests might have been harmed, if you've ever felt like you were being hunted instead of hosted, share your story. Because the more people who know the truth, the harder it becomes for people like Frank to operate. Frank Morrison is still out there. His cabin is still taking reservations, and Lisa's death won't mean anything unless we can prevent others from suffering the same fate. Sweet dreams.